Parents gave my promotion party budget to my brother's startup. What they didn't know was my boss secretly matched it. When my name was announced, Mom whispered, "She doesn't deserve this." The room went silent. "Arya, honey, don't take it personally," my dad said, shifting awkwardly on his feet. "You just have a steady paycheck," my mom added lightly. "Brian is trying to build something. That's the bigger need." I stared at them, feeling something deep inside me snap, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small, precise break, like the first crack in a frozen pond. I guess if you want the full picture, you need to know that my family has always been the kind where the lines between love, obligation, and guilt were blurry. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. If you ever visit, you'd think it's the perfect place to have a happy childhood: rolling hills, craft fairs, beautiful old neighborhoods where every house has a porch swing. Ours did too. I used to sit there and watch fireflies in the summer, dreaming about the life I'd have someday. My parents, Susan and Leonard Caldwell, were well liked around town. Church-going, potluck hosting, how's your mama doing kind of people. To outsiders, it looked like we were the kind of family you see on holiday commercials. Inside the house, though, there were always undercurrents. My younger brother, Brian, was the sun in their sky. I was more like the dependable moon, always there, lighting the path quietly, but never quite dazzling enough. If Brian got a C in math, it was because he's creative, not a numbers guy. If I got an A-, it was "You're slipping, Arya. Do you need tutoring?" Still, you learn to survive. You become what they need you to be. I became the responsible one. The practical one. The one who didn't cause problems. It worked for a long time. Fast forward to last year. I had spent 6 years clawing my way up at Cumberland Freight Solutions in Charlotte, 2 hours from home. The company was old school but solid, a place where promotions meant something. I was on track to be vice president of operations. It was the biggest moment of my career. When my boss, Martha Greer, offered me the role, she insisted we have a formal announcement party. Something nice but personal. She even told me to involve my family. They should be proud, she said, smiling. And, naively, I believed they would be. I called my parents that night, pacing the small balcony of my apartment, heart pounding with excitement. Dad's response was lukewarm at best. "Oh. Well, that's nice, honey." Mom chimed in with, "That's wonderful, but don't forget to stay humble." Not the reaction I'd dreamed about, but fine. Maybe they needed time to process it. Still, I wanted them involved. So I told them the company would cover the big costs, but there were still things, flowers, invitations, a special cake, extra touches, that I was budgeting out of pocket. They offered to chip in a few $1,000s. I didn't even ask. They volunteered. At least, that's what I thought. 2 weeks before the party, everything started unraveling. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had ducked into a Panera for a quick lunch between meetings, scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly. That's when I saw Brian's Facebook post. He was grinning, holding up a set of VR goggles, standing in front of a new storefront downtown. The caption read, "Huge thanks to Mom and Dad for believing in me and helping me launch my dream. Caliber VR Arcade is open." I stared at the screen, not even registering the bite of the sandwich halfway to my mouth. It had to be a mistake. I called Dad. He picked up after a few rings, sounding cheerful. When I asked him about it, his tone shifted immediately. "Brian needed a little help getting started," he said. "You understand, right?" "No, I don't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You promised to help me with the party. You told me it mattered." There was a pause. "Arya," he said finally, "a party is just a day. Brian is building a future. It's not the same thing." I thanked him for his honesty, hung up, and sat there, staring at the empty seat across from me. I realized I had been naive. I realized that, deep down, they had always seen me as fine, unremarkable, stable. I didn't need to celebrate. Brian, in their eyes, was the one worth betting on. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I threw myself into work. When Martha asked about the party plans the next day, I gave her the bare bones version. That the family contribution had fallen through. I didn't mention why. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, curtly. Understood, she said. Leave it with me. I thought she just meant they would cover a few extra expenses. Maybe downgrade the venue. I didn't ask. I figured at that point, the party wasn't about me anymore anyway. The night of the event, I arrived at the venue and immediately realized something was different. The Biltmore estate wasn't just nice, it was breathtaking. They had rented out a private hall, strung with fairy lights. Classical musicians were tuning instruments in the corner. Waiters in black suits offered champagne flutes the moment you stepped through the door. I stood there, stunned, feeling completely out of place. I almost turned around and left. But then Martha spotted me. She crossed the room quickly and gave me a firm, no-nonsense hug. You belong here, she said into my ear. For a second, I almost believed it. The evening moved in a dreamy, slightly surreal blur. Colleagues, clients, executives, people I barely knew, came up to congratulate me. Some genuinely, some with that slightly envious edge you recognize if you've ever worked in corporate America. My family arrived about an hour in. Mom was wearing one of her pastel sweater sets, the kind she wore to church. Dad looked stiff in a suit he hadn't bothered to have tailored. Brian rolled in 10 minutes later, reeking faintly of beer, hand in hand with a new girlfriend I hadn't met yet, Celeste, I think her name was. She had fake lashes so heavy they dropped when she blinked. I smiled and made polite small talk. When dinner was served, I barely tasted it. I kept sneaking glances at my parents, wondering if they felt even a shred of guilt. If they did, they hid it well. Then came the moment. Martha tapped her glass with a fork, standing at the head of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, smiling broadly, tonight we gather to honor someone whose quiet excellence has transformed our company from the inside out. She spoke about my work ethic, my loyalty, and my results. Words I had never heard from my own parents. And now, it is my absolute pleasure, she said, to introduce our new Vice President of Operations, Aria Caldwell. Applause broke out, warm and generous. I rose, feeling my legs go shaky. Smiling, even though my chest was tight with 1,000 unshed emotions. As I walked past the head table where my parents sat, I heard my mother lean over to Dad. Not a whisper. Not even an attempt to be quiet. She doesn't deserve this. It hit me like a slap. The noise in the room dimmed for a moment, as if even the chandeliers were holding their breath. People heard. I know they did. I saw the winces, the quick averted eyes. But I kept walking. I kept walking until I was at the front of the room, standing behind the microphone, the applause still echoing faintly. I took a deep breath. I smiled. And I spoke. I smiled into the crowd, feeling my heart pounding against my ribs, feeling the way the world had tilted slightly sideways. I don't think there's ever a perfect moment to feel like you've made it, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Most of the time, you just keep moving forward, hoping you're making the right choices. Hoping someone notices. There was a soft murmur of agreement. A few faces nodded encouragingly. I've been incredibly lucky to work for a company where hard work isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated. Where loyalty matters. Where results speak louder than promises. I didn't plan the words. They just poured out of me, simple and sharp, like water finding the cracks in a stone. I'm grateful tonight. For my team. For my mentors. For the people who saw me clearly even when others couldn't. I paused, just briefly. Not long enough to make it dramatic. Just long enough for the people who needed to hear it to feel the weight of it. Then I smiled again, genuine this time, and finished, thank you. There was real applause then, warm and full. Some of my coworkers even stood up, their chairs scraping back against the polished floors. I stepped down from the little platform, handing the microphone back to Martha, who squeezed my hand once, hard. I kept my chin high as I walked back toward my table, feeling like every step was threading a needle, balancing the version of myself I had been with the version I was becoming. At the table, my parents were frozen in place. Mom's mouth was pressed into a thin line. Dad's eyes were darting around, as if trying to pretend he hadn't heard his wife's comment, or maybe hoping no one else had. Brian was tapping away on his phone under the table, utterly oblivious. I sat down calmly and picked up my champagne glass. No one said a word. The rest of the evening unfolded around us like a slow, glittering wave. Coworkers came by to shake my hand, to tell me stories about how I'd helped them, mentored them, stayed late to make sure projects didn't fall apart. It was humbling. And it made the silence at my table so much louder. When the official festivities ended, people began gathering coats, laughing, making plans for after parties and late drinks downtown. Martha found me again as I was gathering my things. She leaned in close and said quietly, "You did good, kid." I smiled. "Thanks for everything." She pulled back, studying me for a second. Then she said, "You know, the extra budget? That wasn't the company. That was me. I matched what you lost." I blinked at her. "I don't like seeing good people shortchanged," she said simply. "And you, Arya, you're the kind that builds empires quietly while everyone else is busy showing off castles made of sand." Before I could respond, she patted my arm and moved on, disappearing into the swirling crowd. For a long moment, I just stood there. The chandeliers cast a soft, golden light over the polished floors. Empty champagne flutes clinked as they were gathered by the waitstaff. My family sat in a tight little cluster, watching me, unsure of what to say. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about leaving them behind. In the car ride back to my apartment, Brian texted me. "You up for a drink?" Thinking we could hit Jack's. I stared at the message for a long moment before turning off my phone. At almost midnight, there was a knock at my door. Soft, tentative. I knew who it was before I opened it. It was my mother. She was still in her pastel sweater set, her lipstick faded at the edges. She looked older suddenly, and smaller somehow. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You must know." I didn't mean it like that. I didn't move from the doorway. "I meant," she started, then stopped, biting her lip. "I just meant you always land on your feet. Brian needs more help. He's fragile." I stared at her. She twisted her hands together. "You don't understand, Arya. You've always been strong. And that makes it okay to treat me like I don't matter?" I asked, voice low. Her face crumpled slightly. "It's not that you don't matter," she whispered. "It's just, you don't need us the way he does." I felt something inside me, something ancient and aching, pull tight. Maybe that was true. Maybe I had stopped needing them a long time ago, and just hadn't realized it. I stepped back from the doorway. "I'm tired, Mom," I said. "Maybe we should talk another time." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but then she closed it again. She nodded stiffly, and walked away down the hall. I watched her go, feeling 1,000 complicated emotions clawing at my chest. I closed the door. And I locked it. The days that followed were strange. At work, I was a rising star. Meetings with senior leadership. Invitations to strategic planning committees. New projects with million-dollar budgets. At home, I was adrift. Texts from my parents trickled in, stiff and formal. "Proud of you. Hope you're doing well." I replied politely but briefly. Brian didn't seem to notice anything had changed. He sent memes and bad jokes, links to articles about VR trends, updates on his pivot ideas since the arcade wasn't getting much foot traffic. I responded less and less. Part of me wanted to scream at him, tell him how selfish he was, how he had stolen from me without even realizing it. But a bigger part of me didn't have the energy anymore. It wasn't worth it. They had made their choice a long time ago. I was just finally seeing it clearly. Spring came fast in Charlotte. By late March, the trees lining Tryon Street were heavy with blossoms, and the air smelled like rain and concrete and fresh-cut grass. Work consumed most of my days. I barely noticed the changing seasons except through my office window. There were deadlines to meet, budgets to revise, strategy meetings where for once, people leaned in when I spoke. Outside of work, things stayed strained. The family group chat that Mom used to flood with recipe videos and church announcements had gone eerily quiet. Sometimes Brian would text, usually asking for advice he wouldn't take. "Hey Aria, do you know anyone who does small business loans? Thinking about offering VR birthday parties, do you think that's a good market?" I replied with short, factual answers. I didn't offer encouragement. I didn't offer money. Part of me still felt guilty for pulling away. The bigger part, the part that had been ignored and overlooked and used like an ATM of emotional labor for 3 decades, felt something closer to relief. I wasn't cruel about it. I was just done. About 2 months after the promotion party, Mom called. I almost didn't answer. But some habits die hard. Her voice was brisk, bright, overly cheerful in a way that set all my alarm bells ringing. "Aria, your brother has exciting news." I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. "What news?" "He's expanding," she gushed. "He found a second location. A bigger space near the mall. Much better foot traffic. He's so excited." I could almost hear her smiling through the phone. "And he was wondering," she added lightly, "if maybe you could help advise him a little. Financial stuff, you know. You're so good at that kind of thing." There it was. The old dance. The old expectation. Aria will fix it. Aria will figure it out. Aria will save us. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the weight of it pressing down. "I'm really busy with work," I said finally, keeping my voice polite but firm. "I don't think I have time to get involved." There was a pause. A long, heavy pause. Then Mom said, her voice tightening just a fraction, "You've changed." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I heard from mutual acquaintances that the second location fell through within a month. Some issues with permits. Some unpaid vendors. Brian didn't say anything about it to me directly. He posted a vague Facebook status about how setbacks are just setups for comebacks, with a picture of himself giving a thumbs up in front of the original arcade. But even that place wasn't doing well. Every few weeks, he floated a new pivot. Birthday party packages. Corporate team building days. VR therapy for seniors. None of it stuck. The reality was, Brian wasn't a bad person. He was just a person who had spent his whole life being told he was special without ever being asked to prove it. And when the world didn't bend to fit that narrative, he didn't know what to do. My parents, for their part, doubled down on the fantasy. They threw him lifelines, money for rent, money for advertising, money for just a little breathing room. They sold the boat Dad had been fixing up in the garage for years. They took out a second mortgage on the house on Woodlawn Avenue, the same house where I'd learned to ride a bike, learned to drive, learned to keep my expectations small and my gratitude big. They didn't tell me any of this directly. I heard it all secondhand, from a family friend who ran into Dad at the hardware store, from an old neighbor who bumped into Mom at the grocery checkout line. When I pieced it all together, the picture was so painfully clear. They were willing to burn everything they had to keep Brian's dream alive. Even if it meant losing the home that held every family memory we had. Even if it meant sacrificing their own retirement security. Even if it meant alienating the one child who had actually built a stable, independent life. And somehow, it never even crossed their minds that maybe, just maybe, they had bet on the wrong horse. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. I bought a small condo uptown, one with big windows that let in so much sun I never even needed to turn the lights on during the day. I got a promotion within 6 months of the last one, senior VP this time. Bigger salary. Stock options. Invitations to corporate retreats that involved actual private jets. I started taking yoga classes on Sundays instead of driving back to Asheville for tense family dinners. I got a dog, a scruffy little rescue mutt I named Toby, who loved me without asking for anything more than walks and peanut butter treats. Sometimes I felt guilty about how good my life was without them in it. But mostly, I felt peaceful. One rainy Tuesday evening, around 7 months after the party, I got another call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text popped up, "Please call when you can. It's important." I debated. I went back and forth for almost an hour, pacing my living room with Toby watching me curiously from his spot on the couch. Finally, I called. Mom answered on the first ring. "Aria," she said, her voice already wobbling, "we're selling the house." I said nothing. "Brian. He needs help with some debts. The arcade, it's not doing well. We just can't keep up with everything. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. It's all just too much." She sniffled. I sat down slowly at the kitchen counter, feeling strangely detached. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. Another pause. Then, carefully, "We could really use your help. Just until things stabilize." And there it was. The old hook, baited and glinting in the water. Guilt. Obligation. Family. I wrapped my hand around the edge of the counter, grounding myself. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But I can't help you with this." There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. "You would let your own family drown," she whispered. I didn't say anything. Because the truth was, I hadn't been the one who let us sink. They had. I hung up the phone after that conversation and sat at my kitchen counter in silence, listening to the rain hammering against the windows. Toby jumped into my lap, resting his chin on my knee, and I absently scratched behind his ears. There wasn't a grand, dramatic moment where I vowed revenge. No lightning flash. No swelling music. Just a quiet, bone-deep decision. I was done sacrificing for people who would never, ever do the same for me. A few weeks later, the for sale sign went up in front of the house on Woodlawn Avenue. It made the local real estate news. After all, it was one of the few original properties left in that part of Asheville. A big, white colonial with black shutters, the kind of place people dreamed about raising families in. It sold quickly. Cash offer. No contingencies. They moved out in the span of a month, quietly and without fanfare. Brian moved into a cramped rental house outside of town. My parents downsized into a small 2-bedroom condo in a complex that mostly housed retirees and struggling young couples. The ripple effects of their choices caught up to them all at once. No nest egg. No retirement fund. No safety net. Then, 6 months after the house sold, I got a call. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. From a local real estate agent named Carla. She introduced herself warmly and explained that she had a business proposal. Apparently, the buyer who purchased the old Caldwell house? He was a developer. He had planned to flip the house into a boutique bed and breakfast. But after running into unexpected zoning issues, he decided it wasn't worth the effort. He wanted to sell. Fast. Below market value if necessary. Carla's voice turned a little conspiratorial. "I thought you might be interested. Sentimental reasons and all." I thanked her politely, and said I'd think about it. Then I called my financial advisor. 3 weeks later, I closed on the house. Paid for it outright. Signed the paperwork with a ballpoint pen that I kept afterward like a trophy. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Brian. I didn't tell anyone. I waited. One crisp Saturday morning in October, I made the drive up to Asheville. The leaves were turning, the mountains a patchwork of fire and gold. I parked in the driveway of the house on Woodlawn Avenue and just sat there for a few minutes, soaking it in. The porch swing was still there. The shutters are still black. The windows glinted in the bright sun. It felt different, though. Not haunted. Not bitter. Just mine. Finally, unarguably, mine. The revenge part? It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was simple. I turned the house into a rental property. Luxury short-term stays, professionally managed. High-end furnishings. Meticulously maintained. I charged premium rates. Tourists loved it, close to downtown, perfect for weddings, holidays, family reunions. I made back my investment in under 3 years. Every so often, when I checked the rental calendar, I saw the surnames of people my parents used to brag about knowing. Old church friends. Neighborhood busybodies. Even a few distant cousins. They stayed there, smiling for Instagram selfies in front of the fireplace where Dad used to lecture me about studying harder. They posed on the porch swing where Mom once told me Brian was destined for greatness. They paid handsomely for the privilege. My parents found out eventually, of course. It slipped out at some family gathering. Someone mentioned how fancy the Caldwell house had become and how expensive it was to book a weekend. Mom called me, voice brittle with carefully restrained emotion. "You bought it?" she asked. "I did," I said simply. You're renting it out?" "That's right." "You're making money off it," she pressed, like she couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. "Yes," I said. "It's been very successful." There was a long silence. Finally, she said, so softly I barely caught it, "That house was supposed to be Brian's someday." I smiled into the phone. "It's not," I said. "It's mine." And then I wished her a good evening and hung up. Brian tried to reach out after that. He sent a long, rambling email about how he had a vision to turn the house into a VR gaming retreat. "We could work together," he wrote, full of the same careless confidence he'd carried since we were kids. I never responded. I didn't need to. The real revenge wasn't in hurting them. It was thriving without them. It was in taking back what they threw away and making it into something stronger, something better. It was in knowing that no matter how hard they tried to rewrite the story, I was the one who built something lasting. Quietly. Steadily. Without their permission. Without their help. Without needing their validation. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. And it felt incredible.